Good afternoon and welcome to the 660th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club. It's an honor to be here with all of you in our milestone year, 115th anniversary. The Economic Club of New York, for those of you that aren't familiar, is the nation's leading nonpartisan format for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. Over the years, we've had more than 1,000 prominent guest speakers before the club, and they've certainly established a strong tradition of excellence. Over the past 2 years, through our diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, we've been leveraging the club's platform to bring together prominent thought leaders to help us explore and better understand the various dimensions of inequity in underrepresented communities and highlight strategies, best practices, and resources that the business community and other organizations can use to be a force for change. We're not doing this work alone, and we'd like to give special thanks to our corporate partners, BlackRock, Bloomberg, MasterCard, PayPal, S&P Global, and Taconic Capital, as well as the many members, speakers, and subject matter experts that are now and will be engaged with this work. A special welcome to members of the ECNY 2022 class of fellows, a select group of diverse, rising, next-gen business thought leaders, as well as graduate students joining us today from the CUNY Graduate Center. I'm truly honored to welcome our guest today, Dr. Dana Suskind. Dana is a professor of surgery, pediatrics, and public policy at the University of Chicago and co-director of the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health. An internationally recognized thought leader, Dana has dedicated her research and clinical life to optimizing foundational brain development and preventing early cognitive disparities and their lifelong impact. In 2013, Dana and her team led the first ever Bridging the 30 Million Word Gap, convening at the request of the White House Office of Science and Technology. She is the author of the best-selling book, 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain, and her new book, New York Times bestseller, Parent Nation, Unlocking Every Child's Potential, Fulfilling Society's Promise, which empowers parents to use developmental neuroscience to build a society that works for families and not against them. The format today will be a conversation, and we're very fortunate to have fellow club member and president and CEO of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Madeline Bell, as our moderator. We're going to end promptly at 3:45, and any questions submitted by club members in advance were shared. As a reminder, the conversation is on the record. We do have media on the line today. Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you for your opening remarks, and then we'll get right into the conversation. Thank you both again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Barbara and Madeline. It's such an honor to share the stage as a previous intern and resident at Penn and CHOP. I feel like I should be working for you. So thank you so much. I'd like to start off with a few slides just to tell you a little bit about my work and more importantly, how I got here and a little bit about the book. So, before I begin, I think it's really important to understand that this is not my natural habitat. Believe it or not, I feel most comfortable in the operating room, operating just millimeters from a child's brain. That's because in my day job, I'm a pediatric physician and a surgeon. I specialize in giving children born deaf a cochlear implant, the technology which allows them to help listen and really access spoken language. It's one of the reasons I became a pediatric cochlear implant surgeon is because in medical school and during my residency at CHOP, I fell in love with the brain. People often think about hearing is all about the ears, but in truth, it's all about the brain. That became extremely clear to me early in my practice when I started seeing dramatically different outcomes in my patients. Some of my children who got cochlear implants excelled developmentally, others not at all. Some learned to talk, others did not. It was a very painful difference to see. The ability to hear, it turned out, didn't always unlock their full capacity to learn and thrive intellectually. So So in an effort to try to give all my patients similar outcomes, the ability to reach their potential, I started to explore why this was, and more importantly, what I could do about it. That journey took me far outside the operating room into the world of social sciences, where I discovered a rich body of research that shows that foundational brain development is dependent on what happens in the first 3 years of life, that a child's brain will never be more receptive to experience than it is during those pivotal early years, and that early exposure to language and nurturing interaction are especially impactful. Look, this was thrilling to me. It helped me to realize that within every parent and every caregiver, there lies the ability to build their child's brain. As a result, in 2010, it led me to start the 30 Million Words Initiative, now called the TMW Center for Early Learning in Public Health at the University of Chicago. 5 years later, I wrote a book called 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain, which really explored the role of early language exposure in the development of a child's brain. In the book and in the programs that we develop, we boil down the science down to what we call the 3 T's, a simple reminder that all adults can help build their child's brain by tuning in, talking more, and taking turns. These 3 T's are really the key to building a child's brain. But the more I engaged in this work, the more I engaged in this work, the more parents I met, the more I realized that I didn't have the full picture. I thought that just with having the right information, parents could make a difference on their own. And they can, trust me. But parents don't exist in a vacuum. And while the 3 T's worked wonderfully at an individual level, they didn't move the needle on a systemic level. I got to know many parents up close and over time. They wanted what all parents want, to help get their child off to the best possible start. But real life would intrude again and again and again. Their experiences were similar to low-income parents across the country who must work multiple jobs in order to simply make ends meet for their families, which leaves them little time for their children. Other parents, meanwhile, have the kind of job that requires constant contact with the workplace via phone, computer, day, night, and weekend. Everyone ends up overworked, stressed, and disconnected from family life. The more parents I talked to, the more I realized how our nation's policies and social norms really ultimately limit parents' choice. Everyone I met seemed to be struggling in their own way. Despite a culture that champions family values, our society is not centered on families at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There are daunting barriers in the path of far too many mothers and fathers that limit their time and energy that they can devote to brain development of their children. As I reflected on all of this, I began writing a new book, Parent Nation. I knew that the world didn't need another how-to book about what parents can do, though I promise you my publisher would have loved it. Instead, I thought perhaps a book that shows how the brain science can inform a society that works for parents, not against them, that could shift the social norms, the narratives, and the burdens that so many parents carry. As I wrote, I was guided by one big idea. Just as laying the foundation for healthy brain development means connecting all parts of the brain, laying the foundation for a parent nation means connecting all parts of society that rarely intersect. And that includes, critically, the private sector. Because businesses are the economic engine of our country and a big source of innovation, I believe that they can make a huge difference. If businesses can bring their creativity and economic might to this issue, recognizing that what's good for parents is also good for the bottom line, it will be a lot easier to move society forward. But look, I'm a doctor. Before we can fix a problem, we need to understand it. We need to diagnose the problem. And I think it starts with something called secret parenting. A few years ago, Brown University economist Emily Oster coined the term secret parenting to describe the feeling that, while at work, those of us who are parents feel pressure to pretend our children don't exist. Almost all of us have known that feeling. We build a wall between our parenting lives and our professional lives, acting like there are no baseball games, no children with fevers, no scheduling conflicts, no babysitters who cancel. But the wall is a facade. All those things do exist, and sometimes they affect our ability to both work and parent. And truthfully, the wall really came crashing down during the pandemic. Parents everywhere were called on to be teachers, coaches, therapists, and camp counselors, with many of them also trying to hold down a job. It was and still is exhausting and unsustainable. And as parents struggle to hold everything together, employers are paying the price too. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, up to 5 million more workers would join the US workforce if American businesses offered more family-friendly policies. Every year, employers are losing $13 billion due to childcare issues faced by their workforce. And people who do have jobs are still leaving them in droves. Last November alone, 4.5 million people quit their jobs as part of the Great Resignation, with women leading the charge. The good news is businesses have an opportunity to lead with their humanity, to treat workers with empathy and dignity, and get people back to work. But the first step is to recognize, most importantly, that what is good for employees can also be good for businesses in the bottom line. There's a wealth of evidence that illustrates the positive impact of family-friendly policies. To offer just one example, programs that support breastfeeding in the workplace have been associated with fewer sick children and parents taking less time off from work. It just makes sense. Better benefits also attract better employees. 83% of millennials say that they would switch jobs if another company offered better family-friendly benefits than their current employer. And the benefits of such policies ultimately extend to the companies themselves, not just by giving them a willing, committed workforce, but a high-quality one too. After all, if employees are happy and can give their children a strong chance at a strong start that they deserve, companies will have employees, a pool growing up and down the road. So what do family-friendly policies actually look like in practice? That could be a subject of its own talk, very, very honestly. But at a very high level, businesses guided by the neuroscience of early brain development should prioritize policies that help parents provide 3 vital things their children need: time, security, and enrichment. This includes offering workers, obviously, a living wage, flexible scheduling, childcare assistance, and protection from unseen or unforeseen events in the form of paid leave, medical leave, and unemployment insurance. Put it simply, parents should be able to spend consistent quality time with their children, especially in the crucial early years. They should also have the option to leave their child with high-quality, affordable childcare providers. And they should have the resources and supports needed to provide that kind of stable, calm environment that fosters socio-emotional and executive function skills. Bottom line, what children need is what parents need. Now at this point, you may be thinking, okay, that all sounds great, but what can I do to make a difference today? The answer is surprising quite a bit. To make the rest easier to remember, I've boiled it down to what we call the 3 A's. In the same way as the focus of my program at TMW is the 3 T's: tune in, talk more, take turns. I think businesses can use the 3 A's. And what are the 3 A's? Assess, amplify, and act. Assess. The first thing you can do is figure out what your company is already doing well and what they should be doing. Create some parent focus groups at your institution. Ask yourself, where are you succeeding in supporting young parents? Where are you falling short? What are other companies doing? Then amplify. As leaders, you have the power to amplify the voices of people both inside and outside your company. Think about how you use your power to advocate for change at your own company and more broadly. And if your parents, lead with that too. Share the fact that you are leading with your values, going home to see your son play at a baseball game, or being open about going to a doctor's appointment. And then act. Finally, do whatever you can do to make forward-thinking policy changes at whatever level you think you can. Every bit counts. And once you do something, always make sure to go back, assess the impact. So those 3 A's are the ways that you can start going forward. Lastly, what is the most important point? Investing in early childhood yields huge returns. Thus, any business interested in increasing profits should be calling for reinvestment in today's family, not a further de-investment. That reinvestment will sow the seeds for the next generation of highly skilled, highly educated, and highly productive workers, not to mention support the current workforce of today. And beyond the economic reasons businesses should be investing in children and families, there's another more powerful reason for businesses to help build a parent nation. Quite simply, it's the right thing to do. After all members of a society benefit when its children receive a fair start in life. And with that, I want to thank you, and I'm excited to begin our conversation.
Hey, everybody, we did a great sound check. It worked. Well, the background information you provided was really helpful. You know, in your first book, you were really targeting parents themselves. In this book, it seems like you're targeting a much larger group of people, really all of us. I'm wondering how you made a conscious decision, why you made a conscious decision to really redefine the term parent in your book, Parent Nation.
Yeah, no, you know, it was, when I think about the progression from the first book and the work with parents at the individual level to now sort of the societal level, you know, it's always at the end of the day about supporting parents and caregivers. And what was so clear is that we could share all this powerful science with families and they would embrace it, but it was just so hard to enact it. And so in enlarging this idea of parents, really, look, only parents and caregivers raise their children, but it takes a village to support parents. And I want everyone, you know, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, organizations, healthcare, you know, businesses, all to really rally around, you know, parents who are our children's brain architects. So
you have many different roles. You've already shown us that you're a pediatric surgeon, but you're also a mother and a social scientist. So as you looked at, you know, this problem you were trying to solve and how you're really informing your perspective, how do these 3 roles, you know, help you to really understand, you know, how children can thrive?
Yeah, I mean, I came at it initially as a physician, right? Seeing that my patients weren't able to, you know, reach the potential, the promise of their promise. I came into it as a social scientist, trying to figure out the ways that we can share the science and really support parents. But I also come to it as a mother and a concerned citizen. You know, none of us parent alone. And I think, you know, in my own personal journey of frankly losing my first husband, seeing how unpredictable and how difficult life can be, the different difficulties that come our way, and how community and villages wrapping around you really allow you to get through the hard times. I want all families to have that. I want us to have the social safety nets. I want us to have the social norms that really support all parents so that all children can thrive. So I think it's all physician, social scientist, and mother that bring me to the table of doing this work.
So I understand that you began your research and your proposal for this book well before the pandemic. And I'm just wondering how the pandemic, like for all of us, it's really informed us and opened our eyes to new ways of looking at things. I'm just wondering if it really changed your point of view, your perspective in the book Parent Nation after what you've lived through and we've all lived through in the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I think that I wouldn't say that it changed my perspective. It really broadened it. What the pandemic, one of the silver linings that came through was that none of us parent alone. What was quite clear is that, the pandemic was sort of like an earthquake that showed us how shaky our nation's infrastructure of supports were for parents, and that none of us parent alone. And so I came to this work initially working primarily with the families, around the South Side of Chicago, families often living in poverty, and just seeing how impossible we've made it for them, right? They embrace the science, but then things like, mass incarceration, homelessness, the gig economy, made it almost impossible. But what the pandemic did was shone this light that almost all parents in this country are struggling. And so I actually started talking to parents from all different backgrounds, from, all education, racial, religious, political backgrounds. And time again, what was so clear was that everybody was struggling. Almost all parents were struggling, especially moms, and they were internalizing this feeling like their struggle was alone. There was shame and guilt, and they felt like they were going it alone. And what I really hoped by sharing their stories was this, number one, this universal love of all parents, that all parents want the best for their kids, but then also the fact that there's this feeling that it's on them, rather than saying, one mom, actually a pediatrician, Madeline, that I interviewed, who was in Boston. She gave birth to a premature baby, was not able to, because of the lack of paid leave, had to leave her 27-week preemie in the NICU after 2 weeks. And, she, when she would have rather been there with her baby. And time again, story after story, what is so clear is that we've made it hard on all parents. So that was a long way to say that I realized that it wasn't just the families I was working with, but all families that were struggling.
Yeah, and I think we've all, for me as a CEO and the interviews that you've done, it's very, very clear that the pandemic hit working mothers particularly hard, and many people reduced their time or left the workforce. And I think it really emphasizes some of the points that you're making in your book, which is it can't be just one parent. Society has to rally around and ensure that children get the enrichment they deserve. So, you've done years of research, you're an academic physician, and I'm wondering how your research combined with your bedside experience helped really inform, the concepts in this book.
Yeah, that's a great, from the research perspective, what's very interesting is that I've done quite a bit of research on the role of beliefs in how we parent. So some of my early work was looking at what parents know and believe about their role in building their child's brain. The more they understand the science, the more they invest in their children. So it's the foundation of the research that I do, and the programs like Sharing the Science helps parents help build their child's brain. But then we started doing research on the impact of living in a society with so little supports, and how does that change how parents feel and what they do. And what's very interesting is that we've started finding early research that living in this society where you feel like parenting is all on you, that it causes a huge amount of stress in mothers. I mean, in all parents, but especially mothers. So even just thinking about, getting your child childcare, taking them to the pediatrician when you have no time off, results in huge stress levels and decreased mastery, meaning they feel like they have no locus of control. And I think that we don't often think about the low societal supports impacting maternal sort of mental health. I mean, now we are, but I think that it's really important to shine a light that this is, the fact that that mothers have been convinced it's all on them is having a huge mental health impact on them. And so that's some of the other work that we're doing. What's interesting is that this mental health impact is a singularly, I don't want to say singularly American issue, but Caitlin Collins, who's a researcher at WashU, found that, when you ask mothers in other countries about maternal guilt, they sort of look at you funny because this feeling of guilt is a very US-centric issue because you feel like it's all on you and you don't say, well, where's the societal support? So I think it's important research to be done. So.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued that a surgeon decided to go down this path of social science research. And, was there a particular breakthrough moment that made you say, I'm not going to do research on surgical techniques, which, most of the people that I know who are surgeons who do research, that's sort of what they're doing. Or, but, was there a particular breakthrough moment where you said, I really want to learn a little bit more about this and then talk with other people about the social science aspect of it?
Yeah, I think I really do say that my research began in the operating room. I mean, I still am very much a surgeon, but when you don't see the outcomes that you expect that all children can have, it's when you take the Hippocratic Oath, I always say your obligation doesn't end when the surgery is complete, when you get the implant in, but when your patients do well. And I think it's just part of the larger journey of trying to ensure that all my patients get the outcomes that they deserve. And it took me on a very windy road, that's for sure. And I think I'm just naturally curious, and I'm here like at Penn and CHOP, the University of Chicago is filled with just so many brilliant research scientists who really sort of, I don't know if they embraced me, but they educated me. I always say I'm a self-trained social scientist, but I think those are, the thorny, intractable issues so often come down to the social sciences, right? I can put an implant in. I can almost always guarantee, that child will have access to sound, but understanding the things that we need to do to really allow that child to thrive, that's the really hard stuff. And yeah, so I don't know if it's one. I can tell you families, stories of different patients that really moved me, that, it breaks your heart that you're like, I want better for you. But I think it's the whole continuum. So
let's go from your sort of career and your research to think about some of the concepts in Parent Nation that are really about movements. Paradigm shifts. And if we think about the history of social movements, social, cultural, political movements, that really can, and how they have been accomplished, how these movements have met milestones. How might you follow that same path as you're thinking about, the messages that you've put into Parent Nation? How will this help us to create a movement?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And going back to being a surgeon, I always say I'm a surgical social scientist. I'm not just okay studying it. I'm like, okay, how do we put that into action? And when I think about all of this research, Madeline, we've got the research case. The science case is so clear that investment in the early years in children, yields huge returns on investment. We've got the economic case. I believe that's why I'm so excited to be talking to the Economics Club that, corporate America can play a huge role in moving society forward. But what we don't have is the public and political will. The discussions are definitely becoming louder, but we need to move, but it almost feels like we're stuck at the same time. How do we move forward? And one of my favorite sort of bright spots that I talk about is actually the AARP, right? Over a half a century ago, it was the elderly who were the poorest, most underserved segment of society. Today it's children under 5 who are the most impoverished, which is egregious, but it was the elderly. And through bringing their collective voice together, the AARP and the Gray Lobby, and no part of society is better served and cared for than from the age perspective than the elderly. And justifiably, I mean, they've provided so much for society. Well, we're in that same boat now for children and parents, and children don't vote, which we know is a major problem. So they get the short shrift. But I think that if we bring together all those who love children, parents, caregivers, anybody who cares about the future of this country, and sort of push forward the policies, and I'm not just talking about a legislative play. I mean, obviously that plays a huge role, but I think healthcare plays a huge role in pushing this forward. Corporate America, and really coming together, we could shift it, because I don't think people realize how different we are in this country in terms of supporting children and families. It's just dramatic. And my dream would be, somebody asked me, well, what would your dream be for 20 years from now? That we would look back and say, wait a second, we didn't have paid parental and medical leave, and 1 in 4 mothers went back to work after 2 weeks of giving birth. That's crazy. Wait, we didn't have high quality childcare where parents didn't have to pay the cost of a mortgage to educate the next generation. I mean, that it's sort of the way we think about cigarette smoking, that we'd look back and say, gosh, how did we have so few supports for the future of our country? I mean, it's a platitude to say, oh, children are our future. But I mean, you're in the same business as they really are. And if we want to be cared for and we want a strong country, we will invest. But I think corporate America can play a huge role since policymakers seem to be slower to the uptake.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we know in healthcare that most of the money is spent in the later years. And yes, the AARP and others have been extremely effective at advocating for healthcare dollars to be spent at the end of life versus at the beginning of life. And we've got so much more to do to invest in children. So thinking about public policy, I didn't actually realize that in 1972, the Comprehensive Child Development Act included universal daycare. And so there's a lot of things that happened actually in the late 60s and early 70s under Nixon. He was about to make Medicaid a national, just like nationalized Medicaid, just like Medicare, and this Comprehensive Child Act at the same time. And it included universal child care, and it almost became law. But there are a lot of reasons why it didn't. But now Congress is back at it again. And I'm just interested in your view on what's different this time. Obviously, it's many, many years later. But we do have a public policy opportunity in front of us. What does it really mean? What's different? And what can all of us do?
Yeah. I mean, I told when I was writing about the Comprehensive Development Act back in 71, where, he almost signed into law a law that would have probably resulted in me not writing this book today. Right. And I really want to emphasize that, it was about, high quality early childcare, but it was also, this book and my work is not about, just working parents. I mean, some parents who want to stay home, I don't prescribe how to parent. There are many ways to raise children. There's only one way to build a child's brain. But even in the Comprehensive Child Development Act, there was support for moms who stayed home. So it was really comprehensive. And what has changed? Well, not a lot has changed from a policy standpoint. I mean, we have not supported, more working moms are in the workforce, but, those policies haven't changed. I think the biggest change is the neuroscience has only strengthened why this is so important on so many levels. I mean, when you see the impacts of having resources and not having resources on healthy brain development, I had almost wanted this book to be about, the fact that healthy brain development it's the promise of your promise. It should be your own right. And I think that the reasons for it have only been strengthened. And I think one thing that that I tried to push forward in the book was that this is a foundational thing, not just for children and families, but it's for gender equity, for women being able to stay in the workforce and have the support for civil rights, for labor. I mean, this is, for the economy, this is foundational for our whole country. And I'm tired, I'll tell you honestly, Madeline, like when people think about children's issues, they say, oh, we care, but they just don't act. I mean, I get, when I tell people I'm a surgeon, they're like, oh, wow, you can hold a scalpel. But when I say I work on children's issues and women and children's issues, it just doesn't have the same oomph. And I want people to be more impressed with the fact that we're working on children's issues than the fact that I can hold a scalpel. So
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I had the opportunity to advocate for children because they can't vote and somebody has to be their voice, I always say, there are future taxpayers. If you want to just bring it down to facts, our future taxpayers, our future innovators, our future military. So many children aren't able to be in the military because of obesity or mental health issues. And most importantly, if we're thinking totally selfishly, they're the people that are going to take care of us as we age. No. And so if we invest in them, we invest in our own future and our society's future. But somehow it takes people like us needing to, beat that drum over and over and over again, which I think your book does, which is very, very helpful. And it provides lots of really good specific steps. And, on that front, I would love to ask you for two bits of advice. The first is I'm a CEO, and I have 20,000 plus people who work for me, and I have the opportunity as a business leader, as a leader, to influence policy in my own organization. So if there are a few things that you could tell me and others listening who might be in my position, what are the few things that you think we all should be doing? And then I'll ask another advice question after that.
Yeah, no. And, I think that many people don't realize that even in healthcare, even physicians, I mean, the impact on female physicians, and there are quite a few in pediatrics, is quite significant. There was one piece of data, I think 40% of female physicians aren't working or working full time or working part-time, I think it's 6 or 8 years after graduation. I mean, they're all, I think that it goes back to that same sort of framework of using the neuroscience. I think that flexibility is critically important, reliability, and, paid leave. I have a feeling, I know CHOP because I was at CHOP. I have a feeling that I know that you're leading with your values. So I know it's a rhetorical question. But I think that really listening to, your workforce and reliability, and as I said, a living wage and flexibility, so are critical.
And important for children. And honestly, if we don't do it as leaders, people will vote with their feet and they'll find another job. There are 10 million open jobs in this country. So we have to remind ourselves of that. So another bit of advice from you, what's one piece of advice you would give any adult who's a part of the life of a child under 2?
I love this one. Well, first, believe it or not, I want them to give themselves grace. Being a parent in this moment in time is not easy. And I really want to emphasize, even though much of my research is how to build a child's brain, there is something called good enough parenting. I was probably one of those good enough, just good enough parent. And you have to give yourself grace. But if you want to build your child's brain, it's going back to the 3 T's, tune in, talk more, take turns. Tune into your child, follow your child's lead. Talk about it using rich language, talk about the past, the future, and the present, and then take turns. Really view your child as a conversational partner from day one, even before they can talk, when they point and babble and give you eye contact. And those 3 T's build your child's brain. But then I want to add to it. I want, if, for us to move everyone forward, if people go onto our website, parentnation.org, we have free downloadable resources to bring groups together to sort of push forward change. And for that, we have the 3 F's, if I could share them with you. Find community, because too many parents feel like they're alone. Forge collective identity. Find your commonality with other parents. View them as allies, because I think there's more that connects us than separates us. And then fight for change, even if it's in your community, in your workplace, or in your larger society. Thank you so much.
Very pragmatic advice, and I think something for everybody that's listening that they can take away. So your book is already on the New York Times bestseller list. And what are you doing? What are you putting in motion to get the book promotion out there?
Well, I'm here talking to you all. I feel like I'm talking quite a bit, writing, and just trying to spread the message. And I really want to emphasize that there are so many incredible groups out there doing this work and trying to elevate their incredible work. It's not one person, one organization. It's really all of us coming together to push these ideas forward.
Well, thank you both. What a wonderful conversation, and very concrete actions business can take to move the needle in this critical area. So again, thank you. We really appreciate it. I'm pleased to report that we have many more great speakers lined up for the spring. And as always, we encourage you to bring your guests to our events. Next up, we have John Rogers, Chair and co-CEO of Ariel Investments, also out of Chicago. Tony James, the former leader over at Blackstone, who is now the chair of Jefferson River Capital and Costco. So that will be a video on May the 24th. We have another video event, Nicole Elam, the president and CEO of National Bankers Association, coming up on June the 6th. Arvind Krishna will be June the 7th. That's an in-person hybrid, June the 7th. And again, John Rogers back on May 16 will also be an in-person hybrid. Brian Cornell, we've been wanting to come join us for quite a while. We're pleased. He's the CEO of Target, to have him coming June the 21st for an in-person hybrid event. And then June the 27th, we will be having an in-person hybrid event where we will honor our 2 award winners this year for the Peter G. Peterson Leadership Excellence Award. We'd like to also take a moment just to recognize those of our 346 members of the Centennial Society joining us today, as their contributions provide the financial backbone for the club and help enable us to offer our wonderful programming now and into the future. So enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you again.